Welcome to It's Bloody Complicated, the Compass podcast. I'm Neil Lawson, your host and director of Compass. Joining me to help manage the questions is Grace Barnett from the Compass office. Hello, Grace.
Hello.
These are unprecedented times, and we need to rise to the new and enormous challenges we now face. Over the next few weeks, we'll be speaking with writers, thinkers, politicians, journalists, and public service workers about how we come out of this mess in much better shape than we went in, a good society after COVID-19. These conversations have live access for Compass members who can put their own questions directly to our guests. If you'd like to participate in a live call and help support all of our work, go to compassonline.org.uk/podcast to join Compass today. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's podcast. Okay, this week on the Compass podcast, we're delighted to welcome Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek finance minister who set up DiEM25 and is now back in the Greek parliament. You can tell us more about that, fighting the good fight, and still has time to write some great books on the future of progressive politics and economics. We'll come to that as well. Welcome, Yanis. It's great to have you on. Thanks so much for doing that. And Yanis just told us that he's coming from this podcast call to a 2-hour Politburo call for his party. So let's be nice to him and gentle to him as ever with Compass. Please tweet about the conversation using the hashtag It's Bloody Complicated, because it is. So, Yanis Varoufakis, let's start where we always do. Where are you? And more importantly, how are you in these very, very strange times?
I'm embarrassingly well at a personal level, at the level of my partner and myself and our dog. Where am I? This is my bedroom. This is my bedroom bookshelf, because this is where I'm confined by the rest of the family due to the interminable teleconferences. The house is on top of a hill. The hill is on a small island called Aegina, which is not far away from Athens, but far enough. And we have a beautiful view of the Aegean. So we have the privilege. We are privileged. There's an army of people sort of working away, slaving away for those of us who are isolated. The garbage men and women, the nurses and the doctors, the supermarket checkout people, the proletariat and the precariat out there working for us so that we can, do Zooms in isolation and talk about socialism. I feel like a little bit of a fraud sometimes when I'm asked this question about my personal well-being.
Yeah, and I buy that. Obviously, that's right. But it is kind of wearing for all of us, the nature of the times. But we have to soldier on and keep going. Let's start, shall we, in Greece, Yanis, because you're back into Greece politics in a big way, and you're doing the good things, and your party is. But they're not great times for Greek politics, are they?
Oh, this is a terrible time, and nobody knows about it, because Greece was front-page news for years due to the fact that we were ground zero for the Euro crisis. And now, if you ask people, what happened to Greece? Everybody will say, most people would say, even good progressive people, that the problem seems to be getting better. But that's a total and utter misrepresentation of the truth. Neil, it's a little bit like a prison riot. While it is happening due to awful conditions, the prisoners riot, the television vans arrive at the gates, there are fires, and there is the riot squad about to come in and, put down the rebellion of the prisoners. This is all in the news. Then once the rebellion has been put down, conditions may get far worse in the prison, but nobody cares. So this is where we are. The situation is far worse now than it was 5 years ago, but no one pays any attention because the European Central Bank and the powers that be found a way of pretending that the Greek debt has been sorted while squeezing the living daylights out of the Greek working class. We have now a much lower GDP than we had during the height of the crisis and a much higher debt. And on top of that, because of the surrender of the government in which I was a member back in 2015, the surrender of my prime minister to the Troika, on behalf supposedly of the left, eventually when there was an election, the people, and that was quite wise on their part, punished the government that betrayed them and brought in a right-wing government. And now we have a right-wing government which is just as bad as the Hungarian government. We have urbanization of Greece. We have the Greek Coast Guard effectively jeopardizing the life of refugees in miserable inflatables, pushing them back. That's against international law. Nobody cares. Nobody talks about it. The Guardian published an article. Good article it was, but who read it? And now we have constant usurpation of the constitution. We have one of our members of parliament, of Merit 25, is now being dragged through the courts for criticizing the police in the House of Parliament. So her immunity from prosecution for things that she said at the dispatch box was removed. Not even Orban is doing these things, or the Polish government. But so it's a long story, and not a very happy one. But we are putting up a good struggle.
Well, first of all, in any prison riot, to keep the news going, you have to get on the roof. So you have to find a way of getting onto the roof so that the TV cameras can see you. Take us back a bit through that process, through Syriza, through why you left the government, and what was it? Just as simple as the capitulation to the troika. What went wrong, and why didn't they feel they were able to sustain that level of radicalism, Yanis?
Look, your podcast is called "It's Bloody Complicated," but this isn't. On the one hand, it is, because if you look at the technocratic issues about the debt, about the budget deficits, about this, that, and the other, it's all, you can make it look very complicated, but it really is not. And in 2010, 10 years ago, the Greek state went bankrupt. Let's not get into the reasons why. It had to do with an oligarchy that was feasting on public debt. And at some point, when Wall Street went down, when the City of London went under, when the French and German banks went bankrupt, of course, they stopped refinancing the Greek debt. The Greek state went bankrupt. It owed a lot of money to the French and German banks. In order to make sure that the French and German banks didn't lose out, the so-called Troika, the powers that be, the European Central Bank, the European Commission, the International Monetary Fund, gave the largest loan in the history of the world in absolute terms, 110 billion euros, something like 90 billion pounds in one go, to the Greek state, not to the Greek state, but so that the Greek state could make the French and the German banks whole, on conditions of the most vicious austerity that humanity has ever seen. The result being that we lost 26% of our income in a very short space of time. Pensions were reduced by 45%. The university salaries, half of the doctors were fired. Half of the doctors were fired from the Greek NHS. We're talking about the kind of thing that doesn't even happen during a war, during an occupation. And then after that, of course, once they had given that huge credit card to the Greek government to repay the French and the German banks, supposedly to save the Greeks, then they would have to carry on pretending that everything was fine. So they had to give a second credit card from which to pay the first one, a third one from which to repay the second one. We were elected in 2015 on a very simple agenda. No more credit cards. We need to restructure the Greek debt, in other words, in essence, haircut it, and reduce and eliminate austerity so that this debt deflationary spiral ends. Alexis Tsipras and Tsipras was the prime minister, I was the finance minister, we had an agreement, a covenant between us that we would simply not buckle. If we were elected and if we were a government, we would simply not sign on the dotted line of an application form for another credit card. And if that means that they will throw us out of the euro, we didn't want to get out of the euro, but if the price for extricating the people of Greece from debtor's prison was that we are out of the euro, so be it. And I was absolutely convinced, I remain convinced to this day, that if we stuck to our guns to the very, very, very last moment, they would not have thrown us out of the euro because it would have cost the European Union €1 trillion to get rid of us. And I don't think they would be able to maintain Italy in the euro. I don't think they could maintain the euro as a whole. Somewhere after, at some point, 2-3 months during this fight, I was carrying out the struggle in the Eurogroup, in the meeting of the finance ministers of the Eurozone, with a lot of help from the Prime Minister. At some point, I realized that he had, behind my back, forged an agreement with Angela Merkel to surrender. And it was just a matter for him to find a way of telling the people that he had done that. That took another 2-3 months. I stuck by him as long as I thought there was a small, tiny probability that he would honor what we had told the Greek people and each other. I stood by him. He then had the referendum asking the Greek people, do you want us to carry on fighting against the Troika? He thought we would lose that referendum. That's why he held it. I feared we would lose it, but I wanted us to win it. He wanted us to lose it. And we won it with a magnificent 62% of the vote. So this is one of those unique moments in history when the demos, the people, rise up above themselves. They manage to transcend their own limitations and their own conservatism and say, to hell with it. We're not going to take this anymore. And on that very same night, he went against the 62% and signed the surrender document. And on that night, I left the government. I tried not to be an opposition figure. I wanted to give him more of a chance for the next few months to see what he would do. But if you look at the things he signed into law between 2015 and 2019, when he lost the government, he signed into law austerity worse than any austerity package ever introduced in the history of capitalism. And that he did on behalf of the left. So Tina, from a left-wing perspective, Margaret Thatcher would have been very happy. Because when you have a left-wing party, a radical left-wing party saying there is no alternative, then she's utterly vindicated. So we started our own movement across Europe called DiEM25. We started small political parties across Europe, in Portugal, in Germany with Demokratie in Europa. I ran in Germany the European Parliament elections, and of course in Greece. And in Greece, when there was an election in July 2019, our new party with zero funding, absolutely zero funding, and under a wave of demonization by the Greek media, the oligarchic media, we managed to elect 9 members of parliament. So we're in there and we're fighting the good fight. And this is the week for the budget. I just spent today reading the budget coming from the government. Oh my God, it's a complete nightmare. They're reducing expenditure on our NHS. Now, what else can I say?
So let's segue from that experience, that very raw experience, into the kind of European agenda. And just so the question is, what would have made, I guess what could have made the difference? Is this just about the individual decisions of certain leaders like Tsipras? Would Jeremy Corbyn, would it have been any different? What kind of forces do you need in Greece or in Britain or anywhere to stop this kind of capitulation by the left, whether it was Mitterrand in 82 or in Greece, after 2015? And what's the domestic element of that? And then let's go into the conversation about Europe and what kind of Europe do we need to be supportive of that kind of anti-austerity, politics, rather than one that tries to kind of pull the rug, from under the feet of the people.
If Britain were in the euro, I'm not saying it should. I said if, it's a hypothetical. Had Britain been in the euro and Jeremy been in number 10, our history would have been very different. All I needed was one leader in that Eurozone not to be pushing for austerity in our country. And Jeremy would not have pushed for austerity in our country. So it would have been perfect. But of course, Britain was not in the euro. Let me answer, however, the most substantive part of the question. Is this the decisions of personalities? Is it just mistakes on behalf of the European Union? No, of course not. It's class struggle writ large. That's what it is. Because think about it. When they created the euro, they created a unique example of capitalism, whereby there is a central bank, a large advanced economy. The Eurozone is a huge advanced economy, right? Huge. And there's no state. There's a central bank, but there's no state. There's no treasury for that area. In fact, what they did in creating the euro was the wet dream of the oligarchy, because the oligarchy wants a central bank. Because without a central bank, the commercial banks will just collapse. They want a central bank. They want a central bank that has absolutely no accountability towards any parliament. And the European Central Bank has zero accountability. If you read its charter, it says that it's completely independent. It doesn't even answer to the European Parliament. It doesn't answer to anyone. It just has a charter of what it can do and what it can't do. And it really cannot do anything except to refinance the bankers. Effectively, and to make sure that inflation is kept below 2%. That's it. That's their remit. So for the oligarchy, this is amazing. They have everything they need. So when the bankers are about to go pear-shaped or go under, as they did in 2008, 2010, they're still doing it. The central bank is there to print money and refloat it. The central bank is banned from refloating states. So states are completely circumscribed in what they can do. If you think about it, Margaret Thatcher, if she wanted to, if she wanted to, I'm not saying she wanted to, right? If she wanted to, she had the levers to effect a large redistribution of income and wealth from the rich to the poor, if she wanted to. She didn't want to, right? She wanted to do, and she accomplished exactly the opposite. But she had the power to do it. She had the levers to do it. She had the monetary policy, the fiscal policy, the taxation policy. But the moment you get encased in a common currency area with a central bank and no government, suddenly, whoever you elect, it does not have the capacity to affect any wealth and income redistribution from the rich to the poor. So this is, as I said, the wet dream of the oligarchy. They have all the institutions of the state which is necessary to prop up the oligarchy, and none of the institutions that a demos can utilize through its elected representatives to take €1 from them. So that's how they create it. Of course, the problem is that this architecture was prone to massive crisis. They know this. They know this very well. The oligarchy understand that across Central Europe. They're completely cognizant of the fact that this is a problematic architecture. It breeds stagnation, it breeds low levels of investment. That's why the European Union is falling behind China and the United States all the time. Every year it falls behind when it comes to innovation, when it comes to technology, when it comes to investment, when it comes to green energy, when it comes to electric cars, when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to big tech. Europe is shrinking technologically. And European capitalism is going from one defeat to the next, compared to China and the United States. But they don't care. They care. They don't like it. But are they prepared to sacrifice their wet dream of having created institutions that the demos can never access and can never utilize on behalf of the many? No, they're not. It took them decades to build the system.
So where are we in the intellectual ideas, the institutions we need to democratize and humanize Europe, and the political forces capable of doing that?
Not in a good place.
No.
Not in a good place. Progressives have been squeezed out of contention. If you look at the European Parliament election in May 2019, we contested it. We didn't do well as DiEM25. We got 1.5 million votes across Europe, which sounds like a lot, but it isn't in the broader context. Still, we are happy because we had, as I said, 50,000 euros to run a campaign across the continent. So we did quite well with 1.5 million votes. But the two forces, the two blocks that prevailed were the same establishment, the oligarchic establishment doing business as usual, the one that I just described, and the fascists. The Le Pens, the Salvinis, the Alternative for Deutschland, all those ultra-xenophobic, quasi-fascist, proto-fascist parties. They are the ones. And we were squeezed in the middle. Progressives were squeezed in the middle. If you look at the shift, there was a shift away from conservative parties to ultra-right-wing parties. There was a complete collapse of social democracy. Social democracy simply doesn't exist anymore. The German SPD has disappeared without a trace. The French socialists are a disgrace and, a joke now. The Italian Renziite PD is absolutely complicit in the stagnation of Italy and the rise of various populists of the xenophobic right. And, we are defeated as DiEM25 in the May 2019 European Parliament election, but we remain defiant because I still believe that what we try to do, which is to go beyond the political party that is established at the nation-state level and to create a transnational movement, because DiEM25 was the only movement that stood across Europe with one program, one manifesto across Europe, the same one. The fascists have the same manifesto, even though they don't need to write it down, because it's just hate the other, hate the gays, hate the climate activists, hate the foreigners, the others, the Muslims, the Jews, the Germans, the Greeks, the enemy, the imagined enemy. The establishment have exactly the same austerity for the many and socialism for the bankers manifesto. And DiEM25 were the only ones who had the Green New Deal for Europe manifesto, which we worked very, very hard. We worked for 2-3 years to put together. It's a very substantive document. We will carry on with it.
But things aren't, that bleak, or are they? So Portugal's got an interesting government. At least Spain is being governed from the centre left. Green politics is rising across Europe, not always in radical ways, sometimes small conservative. But ideas about democratic renewal, citizens' assemblies, different forms of participation, Black Lives Matter. There's lots of movements and lots of kind of radical thinking and action going on. Is the question the politics of how we galvanize that stuff and how we bring it together?
Let me unpick each one of those things you mentioned. Let's start, and I'll try to take them in the order in which you mentioned. The Portuguese government, you called it an interesting experiment or an interesting case. It is an interesting case. Let me remind you why it was allowed to rule. They were allowed to rule because of the Greek rebellion in 2015, because of what we did in 2015. In July and August of 2015, Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, suffered a serious image problem as a result of the way in which she had helped crush Greek democracy in July of 2015. A few months later, there was an election in Portugal. The powers that be did their best to make sure that the socialists and the left did not win. The socialists and the left won a majority between them, including the Communist Party. And they were approached by the president of the republic, the kingmaker, because there was like a hung parliament in a sense, right? With a very simple offer. I will give you the right to form a government if you sign the MOU, which I was not signing. In other words, a program of, let's not call it surrender, it's too harsh a word, of compliance with the establishment. In other words, the deal that they were offered was, okay, to break the stalemate of the hung parliament, we will let you form a government, but you're not going to undo austerity. We will let you not introduce new austerity, unlike in Greece where they imposed new austerity after 2015. So in Portugal, no new austerity, but you are not going to undo the existing austerity. And that was enough to give some breathing space to the Portuguese people without doing anything to ameliorate for the ill effects of 6 years of austerity before that. So, in a sense, the socialists and the bloc, the left-wing bloc, and the communists did a deal with the devil. Now, is this a good thing? Yes, it is a good thing, because if new austerity had been introduced, it would have made the life of the many in Portugal even worse. So I applaud that, right? Did it create a new dynamic whereby the losses of the working class, of the precariat of the last 6 years get somehow mitigated? No. The fear that I have, and that applies to Spain as well, is that now, at some point there will be an election, the socialists will lose power and the right will come back in. And the rebellion of the Portuguese people that I know very well because I experienced it, I was there, I was in Lisbon, I was in Porto with them, who wanted to get effectively to remove the yoke of austerity from their shoulders. That has failed, and it's failed with a seal of approval of a left-wing government. Is this a good thing? Is this a revolutionary thing? Is this bringing hope? I don't think so. Spain, for me, is a heartache, because Podemos were the movement that came out of the indignados, the indignants, from the squares, the equivalent of Occupy, the city Occupy, Wall Street, and so on. We had an equivalent here that gave rise to Syriza and our government. Now, they came from zero, the Podemos, which means we can, right? They came from zero, from the squares, to get 5% of the vote, 15% of the vote, 23% of the vote. They were about to eclipse the Social Democrats, who are complicit in all this, like the Social Democrats are everywhere across Europe. And what happened was, Tsipras' surrender in 2015 destroyed Podemos. Effectively, let me describe to you what happened one day on the 27th of July. These dates are imprinted in my brain, of 2015, when Tsipras signed the surrender document. The right-wing Spanish prime minister came out holding that paper with a signature of Tsipras, saying to the Spanish cameras awaiting outside, this is what you get if you vote for Podemos. So from that moment, Podemos started declining. And now what they did were effectively to accept some ministerial positions. They became the minority partner in the Social Democratic government, which is pursuing 100% the directives of the European Central Bank, of the Commission, and they will be jettisoned. And the only real winners in terms of the dynamics of politics in Spain are the right wing and the fascists of Vox, who are now rising up. You mentioned the Greens. Well, of course, you mean the German Greens, because there are no other Greens. But the German Greens have already sold their soul to the devil. They're already planning to rule together with the CDU, with the Christian Democrats. They've already sold out regarding, diesel engines, regarding energy, regarding a Green New Deal for Europe, a real Green New Deal for Europe. They resisted. I debated them. Some of them are my friends, right? But I debated them during the European Parliament election because, as I said, I stood in Germany as a candidate for European Parliament in Germany, which confused a lot of people, but that was fun. And I debated Sven Giegold, the representative of the Green Party. And Sven is a friend. I've worked with him on the Green New Deal since 2003, 2004. And his party effectively imposed upon him to oppose the very simple proposition that DiEM25 was putting forward about a Green New Deal that financed through a large green bond issue by the European Investment Bank. Why? Because the Green Party is now creating the circumstances to get into bed with the CDU. And they do not want to be fiscally responsible. In other words, they subscribe to austerity. They want to do green austerity. There is no such thing. It is impossible to do green austerity. And this is what the Green parties are offering now, where they can get some power. Where they cannot get some power, they just say whatever it is that they want to say. Finally, does this mean there is no hope? No, there is hope. And you mentioned some rays of hope, very powerful rays of hope, very distinctive ones, Fridays for Future, the youngsters who were striking before the pandemic, the, Black Lives Matter. Absolutely. These spontaneous movements that are outside the party system are a great source of optimism and hope. But let us not fool ourselves. When it comes to political party formations, we're going from bad to worse.
Okay, well, maybe we'll come back to that in a bit. Before we go over to Grace and members' questions, Yanis, just tell us a bit about your latest book, Another Now, because that is a book of hope. It's a book of vision and potentials and different futures. Just tell us a bit about that before we get some questions from the membership.
Well, thank you for giving me an opportunity to plug my recent book. It's a book that I was resisting. Resisting the writing of for decades because, as you know, we leftists tend to criticize capitalism, but when anyone asks us, so if you don't like capitalism, mate, what's the alternative? Then we start mumbling, we change the subject, we sing the red flag, because what are we going to say? Social democracy is bunk. The Soviet Union was a catastrophe. So I knew at some point I would have to answer the question to the best of my ability. It's a difficult question to answer. And moreover, it sounded very boring to sit down and write a blueprint of the kind of utopia, socialist market, democratic utopia that I would care for. But then the idea came to me that if I were to write it as a science fiction novel, where a group of friends representing people I've known and loved and hated stumble upon a wormhole which leads them to a different time-space continuum that effectively took off from ours, separated from ours, bifurcated from ours in 2008 during the great financial crisis, with people doing things very differently to how we did things, and thus creating a democratic socialist international order. What would it look like? How could it have come about? So through this wormhole, they find out from their alter egos, from themselves in the other now, because they inhabit both timelines at once. They discover what could have happened. And then there are twists and turns to the story, which I'm not going to reveal, that the purpose of which is simple, to ask ourselves as socialists the very difficult question. And the most difficult question is not what would socialism look like, but how far are we prepared to go to bring it about?
Good question, and I think that's one that Compass looks at all the time. It's I think your book sounds great because it helps paint the picture of the society we want to move towards. But the question for us in this conversation today and always is, how do we get as far as we possibly can? And as you say, what are we prepared to do?
Hello, this is Grace from the Compass office, interrupting for a moment. I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. It's Bloody Complicated is brought to you by Compass and is made possible by the support of our amazing members, like Clive. Here's Clive on why he joined the Compass community.
My name's Clive Lewis. I'm a Labour MP for Norwich South. I've been involved with Compass for 7 years or more and a member for a few years now. My involvement with Compass first started because it was the first left-wing organisation I saw that was really pushing forward the environmental agenda. This was years ahead of anything that was being talked about in Labour at the time, and I thought it was fantastic. I keep supporting Compass today because it's a refuge, in a political environment which, to be quite frank, is extremely tribal, it's extremely difficult. It's the culture of Compass. It's about asking difficult questions and acknowledging that there will be differences, but actually those differences are a strength, not a weakness. You can be in any faction of the Labour Party or any faction of the Green Party or the Liberal Democrats or any other progressive organisation, or in no political party, just someone who's interested in the world around them and wants to see the world change for the better. It's where I get my political sustenance from, and it means a lot to me to be a part of that community, and that's why I would wholeheartedly endorse it to you.
Find out more about joining the Compass community at compassonline.org.uk/podcast. And now, back to the conversation.
So, Grace, do you want to take over and start bringing in some members to put their questions to Yanis?
Yeah, we've got lots of really good questions in the Q&A. The first one comes from Rachel Swaby. It kind of follows on from what you were just talking about your most recent book.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well.
I haven't read your book yet, your latest book, but I sort of have heard about the concept of this solution-focused look at policy. So I was just wondering, in terms of creating this just transition to a more climate and people-friendly economy, I realise it's probably not one single policy, but if you had to choose one single policy change that we should all be campaigning for in 2021, what would it be?
Oh, that's an easy one, Rachel. Cut the middleman out of the deal. And who is the middleman in this case? Commercial banks. Let me give you an example, since you live in the United Kingdom. The Bank of England has printed £1 trillion, okay, to give to the financiers, in the hope that the financiers, the City of London, Barclays Bank, whoever, they will lend it to you, to small businesses, to large businesses, that they will create good jobs, green jobs, hopefully, with the money. That, of course, is pie in the sky. It never happens. Because the moment you put between the Bank of England and the good people of Britain, whether these are small businesses, larger businesses, households, doesn't matter, cooperatives, when you put between them a commercial bank, the money gets lost. The money gets sidetracked. I'm not saying that they steal it, but think about it. Imagine you are the CEO of Barclays Bank or the CFO of Barclays Bank, and you receive a telephone call on the 12th of August of 2020. Why the 12th of August? It was a pivotal day in your country, because at 9:05 in the morning, I remember the time as well, the news came out that the British economy had tanked. It had lost more than 20% of GDP, remember? 12th of August was when the news came out. Immediately, the Bank of England started printing money in order to use it as a shock absorber. And it worked, because within 11 minutes, the London Stock Exchange went up by 2%. On the day when you lost the largest proportion of income in the last 300 years of British history, the stock exchange went up because they printed so much money. But okay, so you're in the Bank of England. The charter of the Bank of England says that when you print money to stimulate the economy, you have to lend it to commercial banks. So that you pick up the phone, you call Barclays Bank. Barclays Bank now has 10 billion to lend. Okay, you are the CFO of Barclays Bank. Who are you going to lend the money to? You're not going to lend it to Rachel or to Neil or to a small business. Why? Because you know that these people that I just mentioned are no hopers. They will never be able to repay the money because the economy has tanked, right? Because the small business that may borrow it, even if it invests it, not enough customers will come through its door to allow it to repay this loan. So what Barclays Bank will do is they will pick up the phone and they call a large corporation. And they will call Apple. They will call British Petroleum. Okay, and they say, I've got a few billion. Do you want some? I'll give it to you for free. 0 interest rate, or very, very close to 0. Now, those companies are not investing. Already they're not investing. They haven't been investing since 2008, really. Okay, why? Because the little people out there have low levels of demand because of austerity. So the big companies that Barclays Bank is calling to unload these billions upon, these big companies already have savings. They don't need more money to invest. They have money which they are not investing. But when Barclays calls them and says, I've got 100 million, 200 million to give you, will you take it? They say, yeah, all right, bring it. It's free money. And you know what they do with it? They go to the London Stock Exchange and they buy their own shares. That way their share price goes up. Guess what? The CFO's bonus is linked to the share price. So he goes out there, it's usually he, let's not, fool ourselves here, right? And buys a new Mercedes, buys a new house in Putney, in Richmond, whatever, right? House prices go up in London. And all this money, the wall of money that the Bank of England has created does not translate into investment in green jobs of high quality, producing things that we need, goods and services we need for the green transition. It is wasted. So cut out the middleman. The Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn had a policy for that, and John McDonnell in particular. The policy was to create a new national investment bank that issues bonds, that those bonds can then be bought by even rich people, it doesn't matter whom, right? And the central bank, the Bank of England, buys those bonds instead of giving the money to the Barclays Bank. That way you create a kitty of billions that you direct straight into green energy, for instance.
The next question, moving on, is from Claire Richmond.
Hi, Claire.
Yes, so my question really was around the fact that for many of us, we have been aware through the pandemic of the power actually and the possibility of community action. We've seen it up and down our country for sure. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about how we might best leverage that now going forward, because there is a sense that the grassroots community has power and is effective in a way that perhaps the top-down conventional leadership has failed to be effective.
The long and the short of it is I'm not sure. I agree with you. Look, I haven't been to England for a while now because of the lockdown. But let me tell you what our experience here in Greece is, and let me ask you whether it's similar in your neck of the woods. The first lockdown did produce a very powerful community spirit and society-wide spirit of solidarity, let's put it this way, that needs to be harnessed precisely as you say. I'm not sure what's happening in the UK, but the second lockdown is quite different. The second, there is a lot more discontent. There is a lot more privatization of angst and fear and loathing and pain than during the first lockdown. There is still what you say, but far less than during the first lockdown. Setting that sort of diminution of a spirit of community solidarity aside, I'm not so sure what we can do in order to harness it without at least one political party that can be the focal point for all those communities to turn their renewed sense of togetherness, of the we, into political action that can change stuff in the House of Commons, on the statutes, in terms of economic policy. Because let's face it, if Boris Johnson remains where he is, especially after Brexit now, okay, and then the vaccine starts ameliorating the pandemic and people start coming out again and so on, all this community spirit is going to be lost. I very much fear, unless it can be harnessed within a political party that can, in fact, convert this sense of solidarity into political action. And I very much fear that Keir Starmer's Labour Party is not that party. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am.
I think just very quickly, I think one of the things which has remained very much intact is a real distrust for the government.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself is something which we could look towards, because community action is something I've been involved in, and I can see how there's something potent at the moment. Thank you.
You're right. Mistrusting the government is a prerequisite for societal change, but it is also a prerequisite for fascism, right? So let's not rest on our laurels just because there is mistrust for the government.
Thanks, Yanis, and thanks, Claire, for that brilliant question. Next one coming from Mihir Roy.
I am Rohan Mihir's grandson, and I'm asking the question on behalf of him. So, hi, Yanis, we're all big fans. The question is what is the nature of debt in that when countries are borrowing money, their central banks are borrowing money, every country is in debt. Where is this money coming from? Is it being created out of thin air? Are they all borrowing from each other? So that's a bit of a philosophical question on the nature of money, but I think it's relevant to how we understand the economy that we're in.
Well, let's get one thing straight. Central banks do not borrow. Central banks print. Governments borrow. As long as governments borrow in their own currency, not in dollars or in yen or in euros, and as long as there is a central bank that can actually print that stuff and finance the government, right? During periods when you've got such excess supply of everything, including labor, you don't have a problem. You don't have a debt problem. You do have a debt problem if you are Greece and you don't have your central bank. You have a foreign central bank in Frankfurt that is, squeezing you whenever it feels like it for whatever political reasons there are. So the last thing you should worry about now in the United Kingdom or in the United States, for that matter, or in Japan, is public debt. As long as public debt is denominated in your own currency. What you should worry about is, and I alluded to this earlier, and I'm not going to repeat myself, what do you do with the money that the central bank, the Bank of England, prints? At the moment, it is wasted. It is not that it is, if they were simply printing it and putting it in the waste basket, that would have been fine. It would have been a waste, but at least it wouldn't be toxic. But when they print it and give it to the oligarchy, and the oligarchy use it to buy up assets, and you have the stock exchange doing magnificently well, house prices in the well-to-do areas are going up. House prices then trickle down and start going up in other areas that are not that well-to-do. While the little people, you and me, have far less money and more precarious future when it comes to jobs and so on, and there is no investment taking place in the things that we need to ameliorate climate change, this disparity becomes a source of discontent and of toxicity. It poisons our democracies as well. So this is what we should really be worried about. When it comes to the accounting of debt, yes, for every debtor there is a lender. When people say, but there's $700 trillion worth of debt. Where does this come from? Well, from the rich people, who are the lenders. It all balances out. But the rate of change is such that the whole thing is unsustainable. And when you've got so much money concentrating in such few hands, in the end, the many can't afford to buy the stuff produced by the companies of the few. And that's when capitalism falls flat on its face.
Thanks, Yanis. We'll get to another question from Kieran Breen.
Privileged to listen to you. And I just want to ask, post 2008, you would have thought the left would have prospered, but we know it seems like, kind of strongman right-wing populism has. So how can we? Well, why is that? And how do we get a sort of left Green New Deal to prosper?
The only reason why we have done so badly is because we're a pathetic lot of gits. That's why. We, the left, have no one to blame but the left, ourselves. We are standing in front of history and we should hang our heads in shame. I don't, look, because time is running away from me. Let me speak from a Greek perspective, right? In 2015, I was a member of a government which famously lost at the battle against international capital. And we were crushed. Whose fault was it? Our fault. Entirely our fault. I mean, Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister, he was doing his job. The IMF was doing its job. The European Central Bank, they were doing their job. Their job was to crush us. And our job was not to get crushed. And the only way we would not get crushed is if we remained united. We did not remain united, and we were crushed. Remember the old slogan of the trade unions movement? United we stand, divided we fall. We are divided. This is the reason. Okay, so let's look at the mirror when we ask the question, why have we failed since 2008 to take advantage of the fact that capitalism had a major spasm, a major crisis that only the left had predicted, that only the left could analyze properly, scientifically, and well, and we did that. And only the left could botch completely the business of organizing in order to take advantage of that on behalf of the many. We failed.
Right, loud and clear. Thanks, Yanis. Last question, I think, will come from Bob War.
Hello, Yanis. My question was basically about popularizing it and translating it into a language that ordinary people can understand. I asked the right use simplistic metaphors, such as running a household budget or maxing out on the credit card, and it is effective in shaping public debate. How can we develop arguments for our ideas that are as effective?
Look, I've spent my life answering your question, trying to create simple but not simplistic narratives. And I remember I was on BBC Question Time when the same credit card kind of narrative by which somebody supported austerity on the basis that when the going gets tough, you need to tighten your belt. And I think that the answer I gave convinced most of the audience, if not all of the audience, including those who were pro-austerity. There are simple arguments we can have. I cannot now recite each one of them, but every book I've written, every article I've written is all about explaining in simple but not simplistic terms what is happening. Because as I said right at the beginning, yes, it is bloody complicated, but the gist of it is really very simple. So just off the top of my head, regarding the belt tightening metaphor, right? Of course, we need parsimony at the private level. So if you can't make your ends meet, you've got to tighten your belt. But you can do that only because you are privileged in a way that the government is not. You're privileged in the sense that your income is independent of your expenditure. So if you don't go out to eat, you can't now because of lockdown. But if you don't buy another phone, right? And you stick to the old phone, you've saved some money. Your income has not changed. And therefore, you shrink the distance between your expenditure and your income. But if you're the government, and during the bad times in particular, you try to cut down your expenditure in order to reduce your deficit, you are going to resemble a stupid cat chasing its tail. Because the more you cut your expenditure, the more you cut your tax receipts. Because your expenditure is a contributor to national income. The moment you cut it, national income comes down, income comes down, tax receipts come down. And then what do you have to do? Cut more. And then that's the cat that chases its own tail, or George Osborne in 2 words.
Okay, brilliant and honest answers and full answers, Yanis. Thanks for those. As we begin to wind up, let's just where do you think, the emphasis of people like, Compass and the others that kind of want to see the electoral collaboration, come this weekend, we celebrate, if the word is celebrate, the anniversary of the last general election here in the UK, where progressive votes divide and the right conquer. We're going to be announcing towards the end of the week kind of new initiatives around progressive majorities and progressive alliances. Do you think that's the way that the left has got to go in order to capture power, to do the things that you've been talking about?
I think that's 50% of what we need to do. 50% is a lot, is a large percentage. The other 50% is a common program. We need 2 things. We need to get around the table, progressives, and I don't care which party they come from. I don't care which section of which party they come from. I don't even care whether they are in a party or not, to discuss which needs to be done. Along the lines of what I've already tried to outline, cutting the middleman out of the process of generating money and channeling it into the economy. What needs to be done regarding devolution? What needs to be done regarding citizens' assemblies, which you mentioned, Neil, before? Do we want citizens' assemblies? How will they work? How do we reconfigure the constitution? What about ownership? Do we want to rethink land ownership? Do we want to rethink the ownership of companies? The notion that you can buy as many shares in a company as you can, and suddenly you have more votes in the assembly of the shareholders. This is taken for granted, but it's an absurd notion, in my view. It is effectively constituting dictatorship in the economic sphere where all the important decisions are being made. Shall we have a discussion about that? Effectively, you're discussing the transition from capitalism to socialism, but you don't even have to use those words. Just talk about democratizing the corporations. And that is not going to happen by, with stakeholders and having social and ethical moralizing sermons. No, it's a question of who owns the shares. I would like to live in a world, and that's what I put in my book, Another Now, where every employee has one share, one vote. And nobody can buy shares in a company in which they don't work. Now, for instance, can we have a discussion about that? This may be very far-fetched for people. It would be nice to have this conversation. And then, so that's 50%, a common program. We are not going to agree on everything, but what we agree on is a common program. And then the other part, the 50% that you mentioned, Neil, is, okay, so how do we get elected in order to pursue it? And, DiEM25 in the 2017 election, not in the 2019 election because we had Boris on the other side, but in the 2017 election, we did we had a little experiment. Our members across the United Kingdom came up with candidates that we supported in each constituency. And in some constituencies, we supported Labour. In some constituencies, we supported, Caroline Lucas in Brighton. In some constituencies, we even supported, the SNP candidate, Plaid Cymru candidate, even a Liberal Democrat here and there, if that meant the possibility of unseating some awful Tory or UKIP supporter. So yes, I think that the answer to your question is yes, but the common program is very dear to my heart. We need a manifesto. The bastards on the other side have a manifesto. It's time we get one.
And we totally agree. And this can't just be a coalition of losers. It's got to be about the transformation of our society. Let's end where we always end, Yanis. And I kind of welcome your hard-headed, realistic analysis because there's no point in pretending. But you keep going, you keep writing, you keep talking, you keep doing podcasts, you keep being an elected politician. What keeps you going? What's the hope bit that kind of makes you respond to all of this and get up every day and keep going? Where do you see hope coming from?
Look, I really don't know, but I can tell you it's great fun. I'm enjoying my life. We have to put fun back into left-wing politics. There are too many dreary left-wingers around, always have been. And nothing puts people off more than dreary, dry people who are not having fun on the left, that look like, kind of Scrooge from a left-wing perspective. I get up in the morning and, so for instance, the idea that now after I leave you and I have my other meeting, I'm going to sit down and work on my speech in Parliament against the government's budget, right? And tomorrow morning, I'm going to have to meet with workers in our National Health Service to find ways of supporting them. And you know what? I'm really looking forward to it. It's great fun. I wouldn't have it any other way. So I think fun.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's have fun doing it, and and also let's not care about the outcome too much. Because if we're too worried about the outcome, right, then we will simply fall into the trap of depression. Because if you point a gun on my head and you say to me, predict now, give me a forecast. Are we going to succeed before you die? The answer I will have to give you is probably not, Neil. But so what? The fun comes from trying. And when you try, you may surprise yourself by actually winning.
Yeah, completely agree with that. The journey is everything. That's why we called ourselves Compass. You've never lost if you never give up. We're never going to give up. Thank you, Yanis. It's a brilliant communication of ideas. People are saying that in the chat. Clear, honest, and analytical, which is what we need, and lots of smiles as well. So thank you. Thanks, Yanis. Good luck with everything you're doing in Greece. And everyone keep safe, keep well, and everyone keep hopeful. Speak soon.
Solidarity.
Good night.
Solidarity to all.
So, if you like what you've heard today and want to be part of a much more equal, democratic and sustainable future, a good society, then visit us at compassonline.org.uk/podcast, and you'll be able to join us live on future calls just like this one. You can tweet me at Neil, NEAL_Compass, or Compass at Compass Office. And if you've enjoyed this week's episode, please give us a rating. It will help us reach more listeners in the future. And it's only fair that they know it's bloody complicated too.